And thus people come here with a broken heart, perhaps broken many times, in which they feel that love has failed. But isn't it the case really that the ego has failed love? The solution to all problems, however we want to language that solution, however we want to refer to that ultimate source of goodness, of power, of love, of joy, of truth, of light, of healing, whether we want to refer to that being as God or as the Buddha nature or as the goddess or as any of the many names, personal and impersonal, from Brahman to Krishna to Shiva to Ein Sof, to any of the names of God in any of the religious traditions or the esoteric traditions that have proceeded through history to continue the knowledge that the exoteric lineages might not have wanted to be understood because freedom and empowerment were too threatening to a social order that required submission. But all of those words, whatever they are, none of them truly touch the infinite grandeur, glory, beauty, and goodness of God, of the self. And so whatever word you're comfortable with is fine, and ultimately we refer only with our hearts to the wordless presence that is always with us, in us, and that abides as the self. People who first begin the spiritual journey tend to think of the God self in the third person as some far distant absolute or some supreme one beyond the phenomenal plane, unreachable, unimaginable, some inconceivable and possibly even non-existent source of being, the watchmaker who wound up the universe and then left it alone and in its own device. People have this kind of a third-person approach, and then gradually as they enter more into a devotional attitude, then their relation to God becomes to the second person. God becomes thou, the beloved, the merciful, the friend, the mother, the father, all relations that bring upliftment, warmth, joy, stability, becomes the mode of relationality between the self with a small s and God. But that ultimately in the last lap of the journey, there's a dawning realization that God must be referred to in the first person. God cannot be other than the I am, cannot be other than one's own self, because nothing else but the power of God can be animating us, can be governing the supreme intelligence that enables such a holographic cosmos to appear and to organize itself with such emergent properties that there can be a return to the source, and that all the forces of the world ultimately merge, converge toward that source at a certain moment in time after the exhaustion of the egoic civilizations and the loss of hope and the loss of energy and the loss of creative power to think our way out of the very dead-end situation that society and the planetary civilization has managed to create. such that now there is no hope for any of us except God. At the very moment that the materialistic, scientific paradigm and the hegemonic view of the world as nihilistic has come into play, it is at that moment that, of course, the luminosity and supreme splendor of God must reappear. And it is that, the hunger, the thirst, the lack, the need for such support that can only be satisfied not by belief, not even by faith, but only by direct realization. That must be sought despite one's own resistances, one's own disbelief, one's own agnosticism. Despite all of that, there is no way forward in life except to move toward that unknown and unknowable self, unreachable by language, by thought, by conceptualization, but completely knowable by the heart, completely knowable as love. And so although it is a cliche to say that love is God, it is nonetheless the truth. But for many, love is as distant and unknowable, and people are as much agnostic about the reality of love as they are about God. Because so many today have been raised in dysfunctional family systems which offered only very toxic versions of love that were not at all true love. Or if there was love, it was love directed only to an object, to another, for possession and control, for empowerment, for codependence, for all of the various psychological crutches that people tend to use each other for. And that always fails. And thus people come here with a broken heart, perhaps broken many times, in which they feel that love has failed. But isn't it the case really that the ego has failed love because of its inability to be consistently directed toward the truth of its substratum? The substance of the universe is not made of matter. Quantum physics knows that well enough and has taught that to all who are willing to study the latest science. We know that the world's substance is mind, but it's not mind in an empty, barren, conceptualized form as the ego uses it to propel its own ambitions forward. No, it's mind in the sense of the heart-mind of God. The substance of the universe itself is love. We are made of love. Our very essence is love. And yet we have become afraid of love. We are threatened by love because we have been hurt by what we took for love that wasn't love. But it is love and love alone that can heal our souls and that can bring us peace. In fact, there can be no emotional stability that is not based upon God's love. And once we understand that the kind of love that we're talking about is not a love that pertains to a subject and an object. It is love without an object, in the same sense that we speak of consciousness without an object. We speak of presence in itself. And if one withdraws one's attention from its external focus and returns to the one within, to the self, to the source of perception, the source of feeling, the source of intuition, the source of all knowing, if one gets to that source, one knows love in itself. Not love for another, not love from another, but love in its own true essential nature. And that is the portal to the Absolute. There is no other. It is the splendor of absolute love that brings us beyond lack, beyond need, beyond multiplicity, because that love unites everything one perceives as part of the same substance. It recognizes the unity of all. It recognizes the sameness within the difference. It is that love that makes us pure, that makes us holy, that releases the toxic residues of traumas and of defenses against further traumas, and opens our hearts again to receive the love that we are thirsty for. And so it is the return to the willingness to receive God's love that is the only path of healing, and the only thing that can replace all of the crutches that people depend on otherwise, whether those crutches are addictions to tobacco or alcohol or other drugs, or to people, or to erotic situations that bring stimulation, or other sensory kinds of modalities that give a cheap thrill of energy that soon passes into shame and guilt and despair. People choose all kinds of ways to try to build up their power to live, their will to live, because it's nearly exhausted in everyone. But at some point, the only way forward is inward. The only way to move toward God is to stop moving in the physical world and to stop moving one's mind toward objects of desire. It is the stopping of the movement that is the journey to God. It is the unmoving presence of the power of love that saves and that removes us from all of the agitation of a self-created energy field of fear, of desire, of lack, of the dread of a meaningless existence, and the terror of a death that cannot be avoided. But once one has found the fountain of love within, one fears no longer any death, for love is deathless, and one fears nothing in life. And one understands that this life and this world is a dream, and that the only protection can come from the power of the dreamer. Can't come from money, can't come from guns, can't come from any other forms of self-protection. All of those only create more fear. The only solution, the only way out, is to find that very core of our being that proves to be divine, that proves to be made of love and light, and that proves to be always in a state of perfect rest. There is no movement in God. God is absolute simplicity, silence, stillness, transcendent of space and time and thought. And yet, the absolute fullness from which all that moves, all that exists, all that manifests, emerges, emanates, and expresses. In its very otherness from God, in its very separation from God, the creation manifests God in all forms. The formless pervades the forms of the world. The formless fills us with that power that gives the potential for all creative intelligence, for all of the ability for the organismic presence to be in harmony with that supreme intelligence that enables us to live in grace and to be free of all the psychological problems that plague us, which cannot be released or removed by any other means than this one panacea of the primordial state of realization of the oneself. When there is love, there is no need for any techniques of meditation. And if there is no love, then no techniques will be of any avail. And so this retreat will not be teaching you mantras or breathing methods or counting your inhalations and exhalations or any of those methods that you have probably already learned in many other places anyway, and they didn't get you much closer to God. And so the approach here is to feel what it's like to be in love. I know everyone feels love. Some may only feel it for their pets. Some may feel it for certain relatives. Some may feel it for other particular beings. But if you can withdraw your love from the limited object upon which it has been projected and feel the energy of love itself, you'll discover two things.